The African savanna stretched endlessly, bathed in molten gold beneath the fierce gaze of the early afternoon sun. Shadows of tall acacia trees stretched long and spindly across the earth, their leaves whispering softly with the weight of pods, stirred by a lazy wind. Birds swooped across the horizon, their cries echoing like scattered prayers across the wilderness. A family of warthogs trotted briskly through the scrub, kicking up dust that shimmered against the heat. The land pulsed with calm, the rhythm of life undisturbed, until one heartbeat altered everything. Near a fallen tree, a lioness stood. Proud, her flanks scarred by battles past, her golden eyes watchful and fierce. Her cub, full of youthful fire, pounced at shadows, swatted at brittle leaves, his tiny tail flicking with excitement. It was the innocence of life unscarred by pain. Yet, within the stillness of the savannah, fate waited with claws unseen. A gust of wind surged across the plain, tearing loose branches and scattering pods like tumbling whispers from the heavens. Birds shrieked in sudden alarm as they rose in frantic spirals. The ground quivered, then, snap! Like thunder splitting the sky, an ancient acacia, weakened by time's cruelty, gave way. A massive limb, thick as a man's torso, crashed. Downward, the lioness had barely roared before the earth shook. Dust exploded upward, silence followed. And then a cry, faint, strangled, her cub, pinned beneath the crushing weight of wood and soil. As a mother comforts her child, so I will comfort you. But how does a mother comfort when her own strength fails? The lioness lunged forward, her claws tearing at the wood, her teeth straining against bark and fibers. She growled, roared, bit, pulled, but the branch did not budge. Beneath it, her cub whimpered, its tiny body twisted beneath weight too great for its fragile bones. The lioness circled, frantic, her muscles trembling, her breaths shallow and desperate. No herd, no pride, no help, only the wind dying into stillness and the cry of her helpless child. And then a sound, heavy, measured, a rhythm of steps that made the earth seem to pause. From the thicket's shadow emerged a figure. Broad chest, dark fur. A presence like stone carved from the mountain itself. A silverback gorilla, silent, watching. The lioness stiffened, her body arching protectively, a growl rising low in her throat. But the gorilla did not move, nor threaten. His name was Bakery, and though his form loomed with power, his spirit carried a sorrow few had witnessed. For many seasons he had hidden deep within thorny thickets, away from memory, away from pain. Yet the sight before him, a cub trapped beneath a fallen tree, pierced through his silence like fire through old wounds. Years ago, these same acacias had shaded him and his mate, cradling the home they had made for their child. One afternoon, unguarded, a lioness, fierce, sudden, had shattered it all. The scream of his mate, the flash of fangs, the weight of branches crushing his child. He had tried to lift them, tried with all the strength of his kind, but he had been too late. Too late to save, too late to fight back. That memory had driven him into exile, a life apart from lions, apart from trust. But here, now, fate repeated itself. Only this time, the child was not his. Only this time, the choice was. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. But would Bakery choose to heal, or to abandon once again? The lioness lowered her growl, slowly, her eyes locking with Bakery's, first fierce, then uncertain, then pleading. She stepped back, her muscles trembling. And then, in a gesture that shattered centuries of rivalry, she rose on her hind legs, bracing against the tree, her posture both strong and supplicant. Her body sagged beside her cub, her breath heaving. She let out a guttural cry, not of war, not of rage, but of desperation. It was not the sound of a predator. It was the sound of a parent. Bakery froze. He heard it, felt it, remembered it. For in her cry, he did not hear an enemy. He heard his mate. He heard himself. He heard every creature who had ever known the pain of helplessness. The lioness bent low, licking her cub's fur with trembling tenderness. The cub whimpered, flicked its tail weakly, and then stilled. Her sobs deepened, and her eyes begged without words. "Help me. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Bakery's massive chest rose and fell. He turned his back. For a moment the lioness believed him gone. She let out another cry, raw, hopeless, as if surrendering her child to death. He stepped into the grass, the blades brushing his legs as he disappeared into the brush. But his stride was not escape, it was battle. He stopped at a mound in the shade. His fingers curled into fists, clawing dirt. His breath came heavy, memories slamming him with cruel force, the scream of his mate, the crushing weight of branches, his child's lifeless hand. He trembled. Could he endure it again? Could he risk tearing open wounds that had never healed? And then a sound reached him, soft, faint, not threat, not rage, but sorrow. It pierced through his walls like light-piercing night. A mother's cry, a child's fading breath. And in that moment, Bakery knew he could not walk away, not this time. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. With a roar that startled the skies, Bakery charged back into the clearing. The lioness lifted her head, eyes wide, stunned. But she did not move against him. Instead, she stepped aside, slowly, willingly, for she understood this was no enemy now, this was hope. Bakery gripped the massive branch. His muscles surged, veins rising, his breath erupting with power as he heaved. The ground shook beneath his effort, the tree groaned. For a moment, it seemed the past would repeat, immovable, unchangeable. The cub whimpered weakly beneath the crushing wood. The lioness let out a trembling moan, her eyes flooding with despair, but then, with a cry that seemed to echo across heaven and earth, Bakery lifted. The branch shifted, cracking against the soil. Dust burst upward in a cloud. The lioness lunged, pulling her cub free, cradling it against her chest. As the branch rolled aside, silence, stillness, and then life. The cub coughed, twitched, and let out a tiny cry, weak, but alive. The lioness roared, not in war but in gratitude, her sound trembling like a hymn across the plains. Bakery sank to his knees, his chest heaving, his eyes wet with memories turned to redemption, for in saving the cub he had saved himself. For everything there is a season, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. And so, in the golden savanna light, predator and protector bowed before life itself. A lioness, once an enemy, pressed her head low toward the gorilla in silent thanks. A gorilla, once broken, found his healing in the heartbeat of a cub he had no reason to save. The plains whispered with wind again. Birds sang in the distance. The world breathed new. This was no ordinary rescue. This was an animal miracle. A story of survival. A heartwarming animal video come alive in truth. A reminder of the wild bond between species and the viral YouTube story that nature writes every day, if only we are willing to listen. And as the lioness carried her cub back into the tall grass, the gorilla watched them fade into gold. His sorrow no longer chains, his heart no longer heavy, for he had turned pain into purpose. And in that savanna, dusk, the wild itself wept with joy. The story ends not in loss, but in healing. The cub lived. The lioness walked with hope. And the gorilla, once broken, found redemption. A happy ending, not just for them, but for us all. The lioness lifted her weary gaze, her golden eyes burning with desperation as dust still drifted from the fallen acacia. And then, through that haze, Bakery stepped forward. The great silverback moved with a weight not only of muscle, but of memory. Every step deliberate, slow, measured, yet charged with a quiet strength that seemed to silence even the wind. He did not look upon the lioness as an enemy. He did not flinch at her growl. Instead, he carried into the clearing a presence carved of sorrow, redemption, and something greater, mercy. The lioness did not move to stop him. She only pressed, her body closer to her cub, her heart thundering in rhythm with the trembling breaths of the little one trapped beneath the branch. She had begged once, and though pride had been crushed, she would beg again if it meant her cub's survival. Bakery came to the side of the fallen limb, massive and twisted, a weight far too great for a lioness, far too cruel for a cub. His deep brown eyes scanned the length of the branch and then lowered, With a solemn grunt, he dropped to one knee. His fists pressed into the soil as though drawing strength from the very earth beneath him. He inhaled once, then again, the air rattling through his chest like the sound of ancient drums. His arms flexed, muscles coiling, veins rising. His back arched. His body trembled. And then, with a guttural growl that rose from the deepest place of his being, Bakery began to lift. The limb groaned under its own weight, cracking in protest, as though the savannah itself resisted the rewriting of fate. Inch by inch, the massive branch shifted, climbing against gravity as Bakery's shoulders strained and his soul bled strength into the moment. The lioness understood instantly. She moved, pressing her head against her cub, nudging, urging. Her entire body said one word without speech. Now, the cub whimpered, a fragile sound of life, and scraped its tiny body across the grass. Inch by inch, breath by breath. And just as its small frame cleared the crushing weight, Bakery's arms buckled. The branch slammed back into the earth with a thunderous crash, the sound echoing across the plains like the end of an era. Dust surged into the sky, the ground shuddered. But in that dust, in that silence, a miracle stirred. The cub trembled in its mother's fur, alive, weak, but alive. The lioness licked frantically, her tongue smoothing dust and fear from her child's coat, her eyes flooding with a gratitude too ancient to name. Bakery stood panting, his chest heaving, sweat dripping into the soil. His breath came in sharp waves, but within those waves was peace. For he had faced the moment that had broken him once before, and this time he had lifted. This time he had saved. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And then, carried on the savannah breeze, came another sound. A low hum, mechanical yet steady, crawling across the plains like a promise. Over the far ridge, a beige Land Cruiser wove between trees, its tires leaving trails of dust that shimmered in the light. At the wheel sat Ranger Elijah Manji, binoculars raised, his khaki shirt soaked through with sweat, his brow furrowed in disbelief. For there, before his eyes, was a scene no training manual had ever dared to describe: a lioness standing protectively over her cub, and a silverback gorilla, chest rising like a storm cloud, watching in silence. Elijah killed the engine. The fell into silence, and for a moment the savannah held its breath. He stepped out slowly, reverent as though walking upon sacred ground. Each step was careful, gentle, respectful. The lioness turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his. She looked at her cub. She looked at Bakery. And then, with a quiet grace that defied all instinct, she stepped aside, not in fear, not in surrender, but in trust. The ranger crouched next to the cub, his voice soft, almost prayerful. His hand brushed against its side, feeling the uneven rise and fall of tiny ribs, the wrong angle of a fragile leg. He murmured, almost to himself, "Fracture, maybe two." With calm urgency, he pressed his radio. "Unit 5, this is Manji. Cub is alive. Leg injury. Need vet assistance immediately." Static hissed, then crackled. "Copy that." 10 minutes out, Bakery began to back into the shadows, his gaze fixed on the cub. Every step away seemed heavy, as though torn between leaving and staying. Yet his presence lingered like a guardian spirit. Elijah slipped a soft sling beneath the cub's trembling body, lifting with care, setting it gently inside the truck. The cub mewed weakly, its voice small yet alive. Behind him, the lioness followed, silent, watchful, no snarl, no protest. Only dignity, only trust. The engine hummed again, wheels grinding against the dirt. The vehicle rolled away, carrying the cub toward salvation. In the mirror, Elijah saw her, the lioness trotting behind, steady and graceful, never letting her child out of sight. Her silence was her gratitude. Her trust was her prayer. And at the edge of the grove, Bakery stood motionless, watching the dust trail vanish across the horizon. He did not follow. He did not roar. He only stood, a sentinel of redemption. When the savannah quieted again, Bakery returned to his hollow, a shaded place where memories had chained him for so long. Beneath the crooked limbs of another ancient acacia lay bones long bleached by the sun, for scattered like whispers of sorrow, silence heavy as stone. But something had changed. Today he had faced again the agony of a fallen tree, the cry of a dying child, and this time he had lifted. This time he had saved. His breath came easier, his chest lighter. For the first time in many seasons, the gorilla sat not in grief, but in peace. Far off, the ranger's vehicle crept toward the vet outpost. Inside, the cub rested in canvas, its eyes fluttering open, each blink a fragile miracle. Elijah drove in silence, glancing into the mirror. The lioness followed still, unrelenting, her golden eyes never leaving her child. The savannah wind carried their story like scripture across the plains, predator and protector, mother and stranger, pain and redemption woven into one. Bakery leaned against the acacia trunk, the sun spilling rivers of gold across the endless grass. He watched the leaves tremble in the breeze and at last closed his eyes, not in torment, not in loss, but in peace. Because even in the wild, pride must sometimes kneel and pain must give way to compassion. And sometimes the strongest hands do not belong to the loudest roar, but to the quiet heart willing to forgive. And so the savannah sang again. A cub lived, a mother hoped, a gorilla healed, and the wild itself whispered the truth we so often forget. Mercy is the strongest force of all. The savannah had returned to silence, but it was not the same silence as before. It was softer, fuller, as if the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. A lion cub lived. A mother stood in quiet gratitude. And a silverback gorilla, once broken by loss, had found his redemption in the heartbeat of another's child. For years, Bakery had carried the weight of sorrow like a chain across his chest, hiding from the world, hiding from lions, hiding even from himself. But on this day, when the earth trembled and the cries of helplessness echoed again, he chose not to flee into the shadows of memory. He chose to lift. He chose mercy, and in lifting that branch he lifted more than wood. He lifted a burden that had crushed his soul for countless seasons. He lifted the weight of regret, the sting of the past, and the sorrow of what he had once lost. In saving the cub he had unknowingly saved himself. The lioness knew it too. Her golden eyes lingered on him one last time before vanishing into the tall grass, her cub pressed tightly against her chest. She did not roar, she did not bare her fangs. She only carried silence, and in that silence was the loudest gratitude of all. Ranger Elijah, driving away with the injured cub in his sling, glanced in the mirror and saw a vision he would never forget, a lioness walking behind his vehicle, her gaze steady, her trust unshaken, as if escorting her child to safety. And in the far distance, half veiled by dust and sunlight, a gorilla stood like a monument of strength, watching, blessing, and finally, letting go. The sun dipped low, painting the savannah in fire and gold. Bakery sat beneath his ancient acacia, but this time he did not sit among bones and sorrow. He sat among redemption. For the first time in many years, his chest rose without heaviness. His eyes closed, not in grief, but in peace. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the goat, and a little child shall lead them. And so it was written again in the dust of Africa, mercy is greater than rivalry, compassion stronger than fear, and forgiveness heavier than hate. In the heart of the wilderness, where predator and protector once stood as enemies, a miracle was born, not only of survival, but of healing. The cub lived, the mother loved, and the gorilla, once broken, was finally free.